3, 2, 1. I am talking to Maria Walsh this morning. Let me actually, I think the best way, Maria, is just to introduce yourself a small bit. So who is Maria Walsh?
Good question. And we might need a little bit more, we might need a few more days to do that. But Maria Walsh is my name. I'm Ireland's youngest Irish member of the European Parliament. I sit with the party Fine Gael or Fine Gael in Ireland. And then here in the European Parliament, we as a delegation sit with the European People's Party. So right now in this mandate, the largest political party. I represent a constituency of about 1.2 million people called Midlands-North-West, and it covers Galway to Donegal, Mayo, across to LIBE. So a big area.
Okay, that's a good chunk of Ireland. Yeah, so yeah, but I understand you weren't born in Ireland though. You're originally from somewhere else, a bit like myself.
Yes. So I'm a blow-in, as they still like to refer to me as. I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and then moved to a very small village called Shrule, just on the border between Mayo and Galway. So very South Mayo, the last village you come through before you come into Galway. And I moved there when I was 7, and remained there up until doing all schooling. Headed back out to United States in my early 20s. So I spent a portion of time, a couple of years in New York, and then found myself in Philadelphia for a number of years. And it's there I became the International Rose of Tralee in 2014, a long time ago, or as we say in Ireland, in Irish, fado. And then it was only after that year, in late 2015, that I decided to move back to Ireland to see, based off a fantastic year that I had, what I can do. And over those few years, I tried and tested some business ideas, worked on a number of campaigns, like are honoring the many victims and survivors of the Magdalen laundries, watched our country go through another referendum in terms of repeal the 8th, or as I like to say, our access to women's health and adequate health. And then found myself questioning why I'm not trying to get involved in political life. I hadn't grown up in politics. We didn't affiliate with a political party. We were community people. So in that small village that I mentioned in Shrule, we worked on sweeping community centres, cleaning bathrooms, church gate collections, March and St. Paddy's Day parade. That's the type of household we grew up in. So that was my style of politics, and is very much a part of even my political life to date, working in supporting small communities, particularly my own in the west of Ireland. So I hope that was a whistle-stop tour. Sorry, I started chatting and I didn't stop. Apologies.
You're okay. This is your time. But so yeah, you got into politics, and why did you specifically go into European politics? What attracted you to the European Parliament?
Yeah, great question. For me, I went to a Women for an Election event. So shout out to any women listening to this. Women for Election or See Her Elected are two fantastic organizations that really prepare and help a woman understand the political landscape. So I went to Women for Election, and I got a little flavor of what local or national politics was, or being a senator. Interestingly, I don't remember European elections being discussed as much. And in Ireland, we have our local and our European elections on the same day to encourage voter turnout. And I went to see the party, Fine Gael, and I went to meet the SecGen, and a 5-minute meeting. That's all it was. I asked to run local because, as I mentioned, local was my bread and butter of politics. And ultimately, perhaps as a woman or someone who hadn't grown up in politics, I really wanted to build my political acumen. And for me, getting in at the grassroots was the best way to do that. And long story short, within those few minutes, it was shared that, well, there was no room. And then they had suggested running for Europe. And I said, give me a little bit of time to think about that. I honestly didn't know what European elections would look like, or ultimately what the role of an MEP would do. Because in my eyes, I always look to foreign lands of the United States because I was born there, and I had a brother living in LA. I had a sister living in Perth. We are what you call the recession family. So for me, Europe was never on the table. And long story short, I came out after that meeting and I text 10 friends across various networks, and I asked them, who's your MEP and what do they do? And 9 of them came back saying, I don't know. And for me, then it became a much broader conversation, similar to the Rose of Tralee, just different sectors, that this conversation of a disconnect needs to happen. And then I felt more comfortable in that space then, and trying to put a young person in a European landscape, trying to see the benefits of Europe, and like many voters, still growing the understanding what the European Union does for us in our 50th year as we celebrate this year. And the continuous work that needs to happen. So not like many things, it wasn't linear. It certainly was a roundabout of ideas and suggestions, and then seeing where I can offer those solutions at a European level.
Okay, and you mentioned there's that a lot of people you text, but 90% didn't know who their MEP was. So that's gets me the question, and I think this is a question a lot of Irish people have, not a lot, but there's a part of the Irish population who have. How important is the EU to Ireland, or is it still important? Is it significant for Ireland?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, something that we often forget, and there's a couple of reasons to this. 70% of legislation at an Irish level comes from EU direction. So that's a big number of policy decision makings that happen here. And considering we're a relatively small member state, the most west periphery, an island country celebrating our 50th year, we as a country has grown, and there's some positives and negatives that come from the European Parliament and the European Union as a whole. But if you look at our whole trajectory and our lifespan of being in the EU, you know, there's no way anybody, I think, can turn their back away, or at least hope not, that the European Union hasn't been of benefit. One being, again, for those who are the similar same gender to I, or the many that are allies and advocates of female equality, you know, by us joining in 1973, saw the removal of the marriage bar. So women who were working prior to that in the public and in many private roles, if they got married, they were forced by law, Irish law, to leave their jobs. When we joined in 1973 in the European Economic Community, as it was referred to at the time, by that was our first step into equality as 50% of population. And since then we've grown into better water supply because of EU direction. We're doing a lot of debate and discussion right now in terms of Fit for 55 and how we as a country and as a union face the many challenges of our climate and our biodiversity loss. Employment access and rights, the fact that we're more progressive often than some countries on the Eastern Bloc, I should say, in terms of maternity and paternity, sick leave. We still have a long way to go to making sure our EU is balanced, as well as for many, many, many years, we were taking from that overall pot of money, developing our third levels, our schools, our roads, our infrastructure, other pieces in terms of rail and bus corridors. And now we're contributors, and we're helping other countries evolve their story just like ours. But Ireland is seen as a very progressive country now. When you think our neighbor, our very close neighbor, you know, perhaps didn't want us to join at that time. We were seen as the sad cousin who then eventually was allowed in. And to think now we are one of the most progressive countries on various forms and in various sectors right across the world. So we've a rich story to tell here, and long may that continue.
Okay. You mentioned, you touched on education, the third level education and the EU. What opportunities are there for young people in Ireland in the EU, be it education-wise or work-wise?
Yeah, I mean, the first and foremost is the Interrail pass. So any 18-year-old across the EU can apply for a railway ticket. Because we're an island, you get paid to come off the island onto mainland Europe. And you get to travel around free of charge around to other European cities. That's one. The other is, of course, probably one of our most prized possessions here in the European Union in terms of Erasmus Plus. So really encouraging not just highbrow academics who happen to be in their second or third year of a university, but also those doing PLCs, working with ETBs or the GRETB. Those with different mobility and different ability, apprenticeship and traineeships should apply and look for. And of course, I say this, please reach out to my office if you need some help navigating some of that information. But we have access to 26 other countries in terms of learning, in terms of work opportunities, in terms of simply just travel. I often also like to remind people, particularly post-Brexit, we're figuring out more and more, even down to data roaming. When people travel across any of the 27 member states, so too does their data. And so there's no overcharge. And I think that's one thing perhaps the Brexiteers are regretting when they travel to different parts of the Canaries and the sunny spots, that they now are a third country and they get to travel. And this too is also included for Northern Irish students. And I think that's an important sell. And I hope that long continues, because it's incredibly important that we also look at the fact that young people in Northern Ireland and many across mainland Britain did not decide to leave the EU. It was a decision taken out of their hands. So when we talk about the benefits, we also have to understand, if we start to renege on that and turn our back on being a pro-European country, so too does the access to young people to travel overseas, to study overseas. And it would be amiss of me not to give a shout out to the many apprenticeships and traineeships we have in the institution. So Blue Book here, working for an MEP or a political group, working for a lobby group who are working on specific legislation or an issue. So there's a lot of opportunities. And that's why it's so great to talk to yourselves at Wired, so that it gets out to not just some, but many others, because we certainly need to break the mold and the status quo that only certain type of people belong in politics. And predominantly it's mostly men, mostly a certain vintage here as politicians, and then you have a lot of one-gendered as policy advisors, and as we know rightly at home in Ireland, that impacts the way our country is moving. So we need to see more of our community represented in our politics and vice versa.
Okay, well, you probably will have noticed in the last decade or so, it's probably longer, but there seems to be a rise in racism, anti-Semitism, and all kinds of things in Europe. But it used to be more like a mainland European thing, but it seems to have come across Ireland a small bit as well, even though I am convinced it's always been there. It just was never really, yeah, exactly. That service was never really scratched before. So, but how concerned are you about that?
Yeah, I'm very concerned. We're seeing reports now for the first time in our history of the state. Bear in mind, we're still celebrating our 100 years too, that we will have extreme right-wing candidates, both at local, national and European elections. And the problem is, and we see it, history repeats itself often. And the problem is when you don't have a couple of different layers of indifference. But what I mean by that is, we have great programs like the Blue Star program in primary schools, where, through the European Peace Project, we get to talk about and teachers get to celebrate and look at the many cultures they have in their schools now. My own national school close to me in Shrule, I believe we have 37 nationalities. Like, that's a fantastic element and a celebration of the world we live in. When we have our young people growing and learning about various elements of a person and their culture right across the world. When you look at the European Ambassador Schools programs, so more directed at TYs or Leaving Cert students, you see again a different conversation, a much perhaps elevated conversation around the different issues. And like this comes in racism and discrimination. And I'm terrified. We have country, and we often point to like the likes of Poland led by PiS and Hungary led by Fidesz and other right-wing, more conservative countries stoking and celebrating the fact of well, migrants or asylum seekers don't belong in our area, can belong in certain areas, but not in my home. We have, well, similar to what you would have seen back in probably the 50s, 60s, 70s, no Irish, no Blacks, no other allowed in our communities. And sadly, we're seeing that rise again. Of white is right, and there is a difference in social class, and it is terrifying, because what we have then is a very polarized political system. We have those them already on the marginalized or minority groups like LGBTQI, like people of color, like people of different creed, being pushed and pushed and pushed further out. And then you see like the numerous deaths and attacks on those same groups. So again, it's always minority communities like the LGBTI plus community, women facing various forms of abuse. We have Black community members, and I often say, and I remember colleagues saying to me a couple of years ago, you're creating this fear factor, you're fear mongering. And I really am not. I'm calling a spade. When you see the indifference happening in the United States, and you don't think that difference is not like the wind, where it blows right across Ireland and the European Union, you are ignorant to the fact of the likes of hate speech and disinformation travel 78% faster online than real news. And when you think of, we are consuming so much news online, we're naturally going to see a number of disinformation elements. And if we do not have critical thought that you can say, right, this is right and this is wrong. Well, this person's telling me this is right. So, and I've heard it enough or seen it enough, so it must be right. And to your point, I think levels of racism and homophobia and xenophobia has lived in some people, and we're just stoking the fire and allowing that ignorance to arise, and we're not calling it out enough. We're not offering enough protections in terms of our judicial or legal system, and then we end up wondering why in 5 years' time we have a country and a union we simply do not recognize because of a polarized, hateful narrative that you see being played out in the United States and in many other countries.
Yeah, I've said it to someone before. Like, I mean, I'm myself. I'm from the Netherlands, so I grew up in a fairly multicultural society. And I said to some Irish men before, I said as well. He said, "Well, no, we should keep Ireland Irish." So maybe we should, but then get all the Irish back from abroad. Talk about 40 million. Do you think we'll have space for those then? I said, "Well, no." So then you have your answer right there. So, but yeah.
You know, I think to your point, I think it's incredibly sad when you look at, you know, the history books of what the country went through in the 1850s and many years, the many who fled because of their orientation or because of fear around the Troubles in the 60s, 70s and 80s, the many who fled to the UK and further afield in the various financial crashes, and then the most recent financial crash in terms of my generation coming out of college, who are dotted around the world, building cities, to your point, and countries like the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And then, yeah, to your point, then it's right. Well, do you call them back? I think sometimes what's the saying? Eaten bread is soon forgotten. And we need to realize that we need to wake up to the fact that we cannot say things like Kate Mila Fulcha and that be our main tourist line, and then actually not put action to those words.
Only for a few people. Yeah, that's a good point. Now, recently, I just want to get a feel of the perception of Ireland at the EU level, at least EU Parliament, because recently there have been a few controversial remarks made by other Irish MEPs, and how is that perceived within the European Parliament?
Yeah, very, to be honest with you, quite surprising. And it's difficult because politically, you know, we have relied quite heavily on our positive relationship and our diplomatic status built over many years for the likes of Brexit negotiations. And bear in mind, when you have the likes of Michel Barnier and Vice President Shevkovich right now, even our President Commissioner Van der Leyen, consistently putting Ireland at the centre of peace and stability, regardless of the movement of ideas and ideologies when we talk about Brexit. And then you have on the flip side a very small portion of Irish MEPs now sharing a very different narrative, being pro-aggressor, be it between Russia or China. And you know, I heard one comment quite recently where around the protests in Iran, support of women, that had also turned, which is not a reflection of the many, particularly us MEPs, and I can only speak really on behalf of the Fine Gael delegation, that, you know, we're really trying to break down the indifference that is being seen and felt in other parts of the world and in other parts of the European Union. So it's always disappointing when you hear that narrative being led out by Irish, because that is not a reflection of our country at a political level, for sure. But this is where democracy needs to be played out, and we need to understand. And I think it comes back to, sometimes we think it's hilarious what goes on in Europe, and we send people who is anti something or you know, aggressive towards one issue. Whereas we also have to realize, back to the point I made earlier, 70% of legislation comes from here. Our European or international diplomacy status often is fed from here. And we're dealing and working with future prime ministers, future ministers, future commissioners. So our relationships and how we build with these people is very, very important for the longevity of our positive relationship as a country. And we think, well, we'll send some who are that anti narrative, and that's fine if that's the politics you want. But I can tell you this, we need to be having stronger conversations and getting to people more so that they understand the landscape of the politics they wish to have. And speaking with some colleagues in the left, bear in mind, of 13 MEPs, about 25% of those MEPs sit in the left. They're the smallest, if not one of the smallest political groups, have very little weight when we talk about legislation and direction, but their words speak. And when you're featuring on Russia and China news quite often, I think we need to start looking a little bit closer to home and looking at our elections a little bit more seriously. But again, that's my opinion, and it fuels me to go back out to more and more constituents across Midlands-North-West to make sure in our 50th year they understand what could happen. But again, very easy for me to say that when I'm a centrist who really believes the best politics is one people working together versus a divisive one. But I'm 4 years young, and hopefully that will remain true for a lot longer.
Yeah, I mean, but I think it also comes down to educating people on several subjects. I think that's why it is important when I also talk to parliamentarians and stuff and things like that. So yeah, thanks for that. I
might just say to that point, and sure. I know I'm opening up a lot, but you know, there's Brene Brown made it very popular again, that Roosevelt speech of. And I look at it in politics too. You could be down in the arena getting your derriere kicked, but you're down fighting for something of greatness. Or you could be sitting up in the nosebleeds, throwing stones and hurling words, and actually nothing moving. So you need to decide what type of politician you're going to be, or you want to promote. And often, you know, the bus of politics is perhaps not going, or a political group is not going to the exact destination you want them to go to, but are they moving the bus in a way that is more progressive than sitting on the side of the road waiting for the perfect bus? No. So you got to get active, you got to get around the table, and you got to keep pushing. Otherwise, nothing moves, and you end up in a very polarized society. So, so thanks for letting me get in those final 2 points, and I appreciate it.
That's fine. That's perfect. I just only have one more question, and that's something I ask a lot of my guests, and it's completely different. It's such a show. There's more to life than just serious politics. It's just, what is currently on your top list for your music list?
Oh, music?
Yeah.
Oh, well, this is where I definitely start losing votes. I am a big American country fan. So Zach Brown Band, Kenny Chesney. I'm really looking forward to going to the Dixies, formerly the Dixie Chicks, at the end of June in Dublin. I go to Cliona Hagan in a couple of weeks in my local town. So moving into a little bit more Irish country, but that would be my jam. Like I said, I start losing votes when I start saying things like that.
I don't know, because I think country wrestling has become a bit more popular the last years, especially in Ireland. So I wouldn't fear too much about that. I mean, it's your own personal taste, and then no one can take that away. So
thanks for making me feel better about that.
No problem. No, it was a pleasure to talk to you. I'm sure we'll have a chat again some stage in the future.
Perfect. Thanks for having me.